thought I'd start with a little bit of history. I don't think all of you know how Ashby started. So the way Ashby started was Benji took me to a football game, which he doesn't watch football, so it was kind of interesting. He was like, hey, let's go to a Cal football game. I was like, why is he taking me to a Cal football game? He didn't tell me anything about Ashby, so we went to the team. He sat me down, and then like immediately, like as we sat down, we started talking about like PlanGrid. And then like pretty much 5 minutes later, he's like, I want to start a company, going to be in the recruiting space. And it was based on a lot of the issues that he ran into at PlanGrid when he was recruiting. But what was interesting about it was we didn't actually do that as our first idea, because I was so skeptical. I was like, what other ideas do you have? And we actually tried to do a financial planning product in the same vein as like Anaplan, but for smaller startups. And we didn't actually end up applying for it because our co-founder, we had a third co-founder who you may see in Slack. They have like an edict.finance email, because that was the name of our product. But he dropped out last minute before we applied to YC, and we ended up going with the recruiting product. But as you know, the rest is history, and now we're building recruiting software. But this is actually the first time that we've had everyone in the company all in the same building since basically we hired Arjun. Like Arjun was like the last person we hired, where all 4 of us were in the same office. So it's actually really amazing to see how much we've grown since then. Ronald was supposed to be in the office with us, but he started during COVID, so he still has his like footstool in the that I shipped to the office. It's still there. But yeah, this is the first time we've had everyone in the office, and yes, we've grown a lot. So Kate put a great slide together about how much we've grown over the last year, or over the last 3 years. So this is when it was just Benji and I, basically in my apartment. Benji took the living room, I took the bedroom, and we just like worked pretty much every day. And then we added Norby right after we got our seed round, and that was 3 of us in basically a WeWork, basically, and we could hear every one of our neighbors, who were awful people, ask me stories, and I'll tell you them. And then we added Arjun, and we added Ronald, and then you can see it's pretty much like an exponential curve from there as the business took off. So it's been amazing to see how much we've grown. Went from like all of engineering to now we have marketing, customer success, customer support, sales, product. Like it's people and recruiting. Like we're actually like a real company now. It used to be 2 of us in my apartment, so it's pretty amazing to see that. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Benji, who's going to talk about a little bit about how we operate.
Thank you. Is this loud enough?
Yes.
Awesome. Is it too loud?
No.
That's good. Perfect. Wonderful. Yeah, good time to reinforce how we want to operate. And today we're going to talk about who we are and how we do things at work. Usually also known as company culture, but I try to be very specific in a language such that it's a little bit more specific. All companies have values. In a second, we're going to run a quiz on Ashby's company values. But a lot of companies have values that are not super meaningful. They may be something like this: like work hard and be nice to people, which is like something you can put on a sign and on a wall, or you can want other people to do, but it's not really a value. It doesn't help you think about how to prioritize your day-to-day work. There are no real trade-offs involved. So these aren't real values, and I think that's the problem with a lot of company values. They kind of end up being really superficial. So I thought it was a good chance to polish our values, which we've been wanting to do for quite some time. Today we're going to talk about a new word for that, and there's going to be 2 words. One is operating principles, which is like how we do things, and then the other things are attributes, which is if you look around and people you work with, how do they typically, what characteristics do they have in their behavior? These are kind of separate things. Today they're mingled together. Ah, no. How many company values does Ashby have today?
12.
12. Okay. Do you see that? Who can name a company value outside of thoughtful communication? Raven.
Ownership.
Ownership, good, nice.
Curious.
No cynicism.
No cynicism, yeah, that's a statement, not a value, but yes, it is on our list. I'll go through this in the presentation, but I won't do this for much longer. It's actually okay to not memorize the stuff. As I went through the slides and kind of built this deck, I didn't realize that we do all these things. People don't necessarily know how to put names to them. And so we'll make that a little bit easier going forward, such that if you interview someone, you can be like, here's our 8-page PDF about our company operating principles and attributes. But we're basically going to clean this up a little bit. But I thought before we go into just immediately talking about how we do things and what kind of people we like to hire, we started with a little bit of a framework. So how do we get to these principles? And a big touch on this a little bit, but a big part of it is really the kind of company that you decide to build. So you go out and be like, I want to start a startup. There are a lot of different things you could be doing. And the kind of idea you pick has a very, very big impact on company culture. And I like to think about startups in kind of like two axes. When you start a company, there's always a lot of risk that a company will not work. There are kind of two types of risk. There's product risk and then market risk. Market risk means, I don't know if anyone needs this. Product risk means, I definitely know that someone needs it, but I don't know if I can build it. And you can put kind of companies on these axes. And I put a few examples together. High market risk tends to be like consumer stuff, because no one knows what consumers want. Consumers don't like to spend money. Tastes change all the time. It's just like trickier to get a business working. If you build a good consumer business, it's usually big, but it's just way more complicated in terms of market risk. Lower market risk is selling to companies, mostly B2B. You know what jobs people do, you know which tools they use, and you kind of know what tools they may want in the future. So I'm going to focus on the low market risk segment, because that's something we decided super early on. We said we want to build a company that is excellent execution. We don't want to spend like three to 5 years like throwing ideas out there and seeing what works. We just want to pick something that we know we can win if we actually do well at that. So we're going to focus on the left side. I know nothing about consumer businesses, so I'll ignore that. Low market risk. There are two other categories. There's kind of lower product risk and higher product risk. Lower product risk, I'll talk about in a second, but generally speaking, new products. So they're still for the existing customer, existing use case, but there's not a lot of competition. And then higher product risk are like true displacements. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail next slide. So if you have these low-ish market risk, low product risk companies, I put like a Dropbox or a PlanGrid, where a lot of us worked, or a Gem or a Calendly. They usually exploit a high value gap in the market that can be filled with a relatively small initial product. So in our space, Gem is a good example of that. They charge a lot of the early customers as much as Greenhouse, but they had to build product for maybe 6 months to get there, whereas Greenhouse has been building for many, many years. But they just identified this kind of nice gap where companies were getting a lot of value, but you don't have to build too much product. And for these companies, it's a little bit about timing, kind of getting in at the right time. Then it's generally net new software, so it doesn't replace, for example, Greenhouse. It's like an add-on that you can purchase, and that makes it easier to sell and to move up market faster, because you don't have to displace existing products. So the result of that is you have pretty easy quick wins. So you go from like 0 to $1 million really quickly without building a lot of stuff. But there is a second order effect from that, and that is that these early wins, they make it harder to build a company culture that then allows you to expand into multiple products or to build moats around your product. Because you're starting out with this thing that you have to do relatively little work. It's still very hard. None of this is like easy. Dropbox is like a impressive company, but you start with something where you have so strong product market fit with a small product, and your company culture kind of builds around that. It makes it really hard to, at some point, add more products, which you kind of have to do. And at PlanGrid, we saw that a little bit. Like we had really strong product market fit with the first product, and it just allowed us to be not excellent at execution, because that was just like carrying the company. And we were never really able to expand from there. So on the flip side, characteristics of like companies that have high product risk, I put like Workday, Zoom, Rippling, and us. We specifically went after an existing product, like not net new. We just said, here's the thing, we're going to build a better version of that and displace that one-to-one. Before I dive more into this, the interesting thing about this is that Ashby Analytics as a standalone product falls into a former category. So it's easy to add on, it's easy to move up market, it's easier to sell more. And back when we talked to investors, we said like, hey, we have these two products, but we're going to bet on this bigger thing. A lot of them asked like, oh, why? Like here, there's a smaller thing, you have better ACV, lower CAC, it's like a beautiful product, but we knew that in the long term we don't want to bet on such a small product. So deliberate choices and the characteristics of these types of companies, well understood customer needs and channels of distribution. So you can basically de-risk the company in this space by just interviewing a lot of people. Like Abik and I talked to 100-ish, I think we still have all the notes. And after that, we're just like, okay, here's exactly what all the competitors do, here's the gaps. We could put together like a website that was a mock-up and be like, would you buy this thing? Obviously people don't always buy if they say yes, but you can still get a really good understanding of the market and de-risk a lot before you build. And so you can build conviction that you're going to have a long-term success if well executed. You can really focus all on the execution bit. Generally, these companies are slower to get off the ground because you need to build to parity of existing products. And we're still somewhat doing that today. So there's a lot of stuff to build. And then you have to start at the bottom of the market, typically, with companies that don't have a system in place, or you have to rip and replace. All of the things are just harder to do than the low product risk companies. And then as a result, or it's like, I don't know which way the causality goes, but in general, the company culture of these kinds of companies is deliberate and focused on execution and on laying a groundwork for multi-product and kind of long-term differentiation. So Workday was actually a company that was started by people that were early at PeopleSoft, which was like an earlier HR tech company. And they left and then basically just raised a bunch of money and spent 2 to 3 years just building product foundation because they saw what had gone wrong in their previous companies and they knew that there was a market if they could build a better product. So I touched on this a little bit, but there are some operating principles that just fall out of that type of company. High conviction that you're solving a real problem. That allows for a long-term focus from day one. And it allows you to, it kind of forces you somewhat to focus on inputs over outputs. So Abik showed this chart. Ashby is now a little bit over 3 years old. For half of the company age, we had no customers, no product. We're just showing up to work every day and celebrating whenever we ship something to ourselves. And so you have to have really high conviction to do that for a long time. Quick side note, this is one of, I have mixed feelings on business books. This is one I like. Bill Walsh, he was a 49ers head coach when they were terrible and turned the team around. The story is pretty much around how he showed up and really focused on all the inputs, like how are people showing up to their training sessions, like how are receptionists answering the phone, like everything that was operational excellence. And it took a while for results to trickle in, and people were kind of getting nervous because he did all these things and results didn't happen. But then 2 to 3 seasons later, they became like an amazingly strong team. So I don't know if you like sports people that go into business and become like business coaches. It's oftentimes a little bit weird, but I think that book is good. So the other part of input type of company, and then obviously the founders and their past experience, and it's kind of intermingled, right? We picked the type of company because of our past experience, but I wanted to call it out explicitly. So Beak and I have worked in other companies for a while. We found a bunch of things, and these have informed how we want to build our own company. And one thing is that we picked up is basically unless you apply deliberate effort across everything you do, randomness will rule your company. And we'll get into what randomness means, but it basically means like people will not have the same goals, they will not align on how we make decisions, they will not align on what kind of people we hire, and everything becomes a big, hairy mess of low productivity. And so, oh, I guess I went ahead of my slide. I don't have speaker notes today, unfortunately, so I was unable to do that. But basically, what happens, companies grow, and you probably all see that, you start out with a small effective team, company becomes really big, and then at some point, almost nothing gets done, and no one really knows why. But we're going to touch on that a little bit and on the ways to prevent that from happening. And so as I was preparing this deck, I came across a bunch of other stuff out there, books, tweets. This tweet series was pretty good and summarized some of the thoughts that we already had. Austin is a founder of what was formerly Lambda School, and we're going to go through kind of 3 tweets. The first one is, as startups grow, there is an extremely strong pull into what I call the dev spiral of bullshit. More people, more teams, more buy-in required, more meetings, being persuasive more than building, builders leave, and nothing gets done. Don't know if that's a perfect analysis, but it's directionally correct. The second one, this force is very strong. The mistake that many founders, myself included, make is assuming the dev spiral is an unavoidable part of working in a bigger company. I'm growing convinced that the single most important cultural aspect of a company is how they avoid this dev spiral. And that's really how we thought about Ashby from day one, is like, we're very productive now, how do we build a foundation to keep doing that? There's also an important part in here, which is like just not accepting that companies become less productive as they get bigger, and we'll touch on that in a second as well. But then jumping to the end, he had like a lot of other tweets about other companies. I ignored all of these, but here's some things that he's seen work, and these are basically things that people arrive at independently of us, but teams as small as possible, extremely high talent bars, explicit decision maker, disagree and commit. Permission assumed in all things, I don't know, maybe not for us. I would need more detail on that one, but high tolerance for failure. High tolerance for technical debt. Also, again, depends on the kind of company. I think for us, probably a little bit less applicable. But very importantly, zero tolerance for not being into details. And I think that's where a lot of companies go to die, is when they hire leadership that is not into details and just can't actually understand what's happening in the business and make changes. But I also touched on an important part of like, you just have to have the mindset of, you can build a big company with a lot of people and it can still be productive. You don't have to succumb to this force. But it's very hard. And here's another tweet that came right around the same time from Jack. He's the CEO of Lattice, which is like a company in our space. He said, at an early stage company, 90% of employee effort goes toward building a better product and working with customers. At very large companies, it's probably like 10 to 15%. A primary objective for companies in the middle is to stave off this inevitable tide as long as you can. So similar idea, but basically just acknowledging that you can change it, and that is something I don't like. Like we may fail, but we'll at least try. I wouldn't consider it inevitable, and I don't think we'll try as long as possible to not be an organization that loses performance as it grows. So that is really at the root of why we started Ashby. Like the underlying mission, I'm going to talk more about like the product-specific mission and the near-term mission, but the real underlying thing is like building a kind of company where we want to go to work every day, we work with amazing people, we do amazing stuff, and we are productive. I read this book, which has a terrible title and some questionable insights, but it has some really good it has some really good pieces too. And so you can don't judge a book by its cover. It is very old. It's like written in a time where companies had profits. Thank you. But there's a good piece in here that kind of articulated better what I was trying to say. The driving goal of any organization should be one simple thing: to be the best. Nothing motivates employees, excites them about coming to work, and produces better bottom line results than to tell everyone in an organization that we as an organization, and each of us as individuals, will be the best and will settle for nothing less. I think that's true, generally speaking. Like people just like to do good work and they're happy if they can do that. This slide I spent the least time on, as you see, about the lack of transitions and animations and visual design. But it was important to get in here. The infinite mission, like if you want, like infinite time horizon, is excellent execution, delivering products to customers, delivering service to customers that we can be really proud of. And that is the underlying mission for the company, and that has always been the one. That's the one we derive our values from. There are some real mission-driven companies, and there are a lot of mission-driven companies, like Facebook or others, that tie the company culture to like the thing they're doing, and like we'll make the world a better place. We're not necessarily making the world a better place, but we will help you have a lot of fun at work, become really excellent at what you do, inspire other people by your excellence, and then hopefully make a bunch of money and then do what you want to do with that. And then there's a pyramid. We're going to hire a marketing person, and so we're going to do external marketing. We're going to talk about what are we doing right now for customers? And they don't care about excellent execution, they care about the products. So something we might arrive at is like a 2-year mission is like help companies excel at hiring. And then it might change over time as we build more stuff, and it's like help companies excel at all things people. I spend literally like 2 minutes on these, so don't hold me accountable, but the bottom one is the most important one for how we actually think about a business. And then the other ones are interchangeable depending on what we're doing, which over time may change. Does that make sense? Cool. Well, probably this be the best is not super tactical. I also put a bunch of fun images into the deck, so we're going to get a little bit more specific and talk about how we specifically are trying to build a world-class organization. One is, I touched on this before, but you just have to be very deliberate about how you do work, and you can't leave things up to chance. So what are the things that are most important to productivity of an organization? People, obviously. I've got 3 bullet points for people. Who do we hire? How do we organize teams? They're actually thinking about like, do these 3 people work better together, or is this team too small or too big? That's actually a thing a lot of companies are very bad at because managers optimize for their own function. How do we coach and ensure continuous improvement of people we already have? So instead of just adding more and more people, are there people on the team that can do that thing? How do we communicate? We talk about it all the time. We've got a blog post. We're going to talk about it more today, but it's a key input. How teams and individuals spend their time, obviously, but it's also a thing that doesn't get that much reflection. And how do you make decisions? Because decisions are an important thing to move the company forward. If you have an unclear decision framework, then you get to a point where stuff doesn't get done. So these are the key inputs that make a company productive if they are working well. And so our operating principles are really designed around how do we improve these key inputs. They're not easy to follow, but I think I mentioned it earlier. I think we're actually doing a very good job today. So this is, I'm preaching to the choir a little bit. This is more for people we hire in the future, for us to refer back to, and to add a little bit more color to the principles that I think we're already living. But it would be really hard to implement at a company that's been around for many years and coming in and trying to change that. So I'm glad that we set that up early. Cool. First, apply principled thinking over experience. Time for a fun image. But there's a saying out there that I can't quite attribute, but it says something like conventional wisdom is often not very wise. And I think some of the failure modes we've seen in past companies is when people come in with experience and they take their past experience and translate it one-to-one to the business they're in without any reflection or thought. We think that experience should be an input into your thought process, but it should not be a shortcut to avoid thinking. It's like, take your past experience, look how it's different, think about it, and then make decisions from there. It sounds really obvious, but it just happens all the time that you default to lazy thinking, and that happens to me all the time still, so you just have to be kind of vigilant and remind yourself of when you might be falling into these traps. The brain is lazy, it likes to conserve energy, it doesn't like thinking, it's really hard. So you have to remind yourself. What is lazy thinking? It's really about making a lot of unknown assumptions and jumping to conclusions. And you'll notice that you're thinking lazily I'm going to get to this in a second, but if you are trying to write something down and then you're trying to write a long-form document and your thoughts don't make sense anymore, that probably means you haven't fully thought out what you were trying to articulate. Or if you have kids and they ask you why 2 or 3 times, and you fall apart because you don't have reasoning under your decision or thought process, then that means you're probably engaged in lazy thinking. Examples, they're very egregious, but I just wanted to put some examples. One example might be we should buy some billboard ads because everyone is doing that these days. Not a good reason to buy billboard ads, lazy thinking. Or we should buy some billboard ads because it worked great at my last company, lazy thinking. Extreme examples, but it really, I'm making fun of it, but it happens all the time. It's just so easy to fall into a trap. Long-form writing helps a lot with principled thinking, and so I think just the way we communicate reinforces that. It's just harder to write a long-form quick document than it is to hop onto a call or schedule a meeting or send someone a text message with a not very thought-out idea. I want to make the slide prettier. I didn't get to it, but a principled thinking billboard proposal may look like this. It's like, why do we want billboards in the first place? Here's a bunch of audience members of these billboards that we surveyed. Here's potential markets we're going to test in. Here's the expected outcome. And that's how we'd actually put a proposal together. And I think we do all of that today. Now, if I was looking in from the outside and I would try to criticize this, I'd probably say like, oh, these guys are just thinking all the time. They don't do anything. But I'll touch on why I don't think that is true. One, you can often make faster decisions if you have high conviction in your thought process. You'll see that sometimes, I see it especially with like people that just enter the workforce and they hear about like data-driven decision making and they don't quite know what it means. And then they basically don't think for things, they just want to test them. Just like, let me just talk to 100 people and see what they think. And the testing and data piece usually comes in when you already have a good idea of a proposal or a thought, and you just want to verify that. And if you have really high conviction, a lot of things don't need to be tested at all. You can just think about yourself, and I've got a quick example of that in a second. But you can actually skip steps and make decisions faster. Back to my favorite book, Double Your Profits in 6 months or less. Maybe I'm going to invite Bob to our next offsite. But it has some good insights. It says, never spend a minute quantifying something you know the answer to already, and never spend more than a few minutes quantifying something when there's a reasonably high probability that you know the right answer. Time and energy are the most important resources in any company. Like, that's the limiting factor to building stuff, but unlike capital, there's no accounting. And people have talked about it a lot, but you have a CFO, they look at every expense report, it's like, Rowan, why did you buy this $7 coffee? But then no one will pay attention to meetings, no one will pay attention to how teams spend time in general, because it's hard to account for, generally speaking. So we want to really focus on how time and energy is spent. Another quick plug, there's a pretty good book on that, but it's also very well summarized in a blog post, like most books. So if you want to read that blog post, it's free, and I'll send out the spec later. So, breaking this down further, we want to optimize how time is spent. How do companies like ours spend time talking to customers? Important, and not time you can optimize there, but some things. Building stuff, like product or content or whatever it is that you're building. Special types of projects, like any operational improvement. Hey, we want to change pricing, or we want to change one of our systems of record. Internal communication. So these are the 4 big buckets. We're going to talk about communication in a separate principle, but basically the top 3 is we're going to look for ways how you can optimize things. One of the easiest ways is to waste time is to be undisciplined about communication, and that's why we have our own principle. We'll get to that in a second. Other ways to waste time in these other categories is doing the wrong things, doing unnecessary things, doing too many things in parallel, doing things inefficiently. I think that's the last one. I don't have speaker notes, so yes. Doing the wrong things. So that's around just picking what you're going to do. Like, am I going to do this project? Yes or no? Am I going to build this product? Yes or no? Basic examples, these could be terrible decisions if you didn't think about them really well and didn't write a long-form proposal, but let's rewrite our entire application and insert your favorite programming language. Happens at some companies, it's an extreme example, but it can be a huge waste of time if you haven't thought about why you need to do that. And it could be the same on the business side, like, let's replace our business system A with business system B because I like the other one more and I use it in a past company. These are huge projects that can take multiple months, sometimes years, and they're often started without a lot of thought. So one of the top level things you can do to improve efficiency is just avoiding picking the wrong things and being careful about what you pick. Doing unnecessary things, this one can creep up on you because it feels like the organization wants something from you, but then the organization, you're not sure who exactly asked for it anymore, and you just keep doing the thing. It's important to audit how time is used periodically to make sure that no unnecessary work is done. And that was part of the reason to introduce Leverage Friday, such that people have a little bit of counter space to be like, hey, let me go back, let's look over the last 2 weeks, how did I spend my time? Are there any things that I maybe should not be doing anymore? Or that someone else on the team should not be doing? Doing too many things at once is another way to get little stuff done. I try to visualize that. So let's say you have a small team and you're running 2 projects. Every project has a body of work where you're actually moving the thing forward, you're doing the things, and then there's a little bit of overhead. Like, I need to communicate status updates, I need to have meetings, I need to get other people to help me on my project. So overhead and work. If you take that same team and you now put in 4 projects, they have similar fixed size overhead. So now you have 4 times overhead, and your work portion, you don't see that exactly here, but the surface area of work has reduced significantly. And I see that happen in companies where people are just like, they have 8 projects running in parallel, they have status meetings every week, and the status meeting is like, oh, we didn't get anywhere, we're too busy, we're doing all these other things. And then at some point, all your time is taken up from overhead, and no time is taken up doing actual work. So the best thing to do here is, if you realize you're not progressing on a project, you have to kill it, or you have to kill another project before you can move forward. Doing things inefficiently, that is just about doing things repeatedly in a way that consumes a lot of time. So any kind of inefficient work. We try to fix that by creating leverage. So building tools, building documentation, whatever it might be. It could be a tool that allows support to troubleshoot something with a customer instead of having to work with engineering and using engineering time every single time. Or it could be, this question has come up 5 times in the last week. So let's document it somewhere and make sure we don't have to ask it again. And on this note, having efficiency depth is fine, and we have it in a lot of places. You can't do everything perfectly on the efficiency side, but it should be deliberate and you should know about it. Like, for example, for us, all of our billing and revenue recognition is very manual, and Mike doesn't like it and Kay doesn't like it. Boo! But it was a deliberate decision that we want to use engineering time to get to a certain product milestone before we invest in that. And so it's important to be aware of these inefficiencies and then deliberately decide when to tackle them. On average, we will try to be applying more leverage and tackling more of these inefficiencies than other companies. So time can be wasted doing the wrong things, doing unnecessary things, doing too many things in parallel, doing things inefficiently and not creating leverage, and through undisciplined communication. I actually didn't test the length of this. Are people still awake?
Yes.
Okay, cool, awesome. Sweet. Thoughtful communication. I won't spend too much time on this, but it is one of the easiest ways. And the reason, like, I think this is the nice part about this talk. We have all these values and things that we care about, and I get the chance to tell you a little bit more. All the framework that we built up for now of like why do companies become really slow. One of the key ingredients is the communication piece. It's very hard to communicate thoughtfully, but I think we're doing a very, very good job at it. But it's always an adjustment for anyone who joins. But it's really important because there's asymmetry in communication with technical tools. It's really easy for a couple of people that don't buy into this or haven't learned how to do it to distract a very large group of people. So we wrote a whole blog post, you read it, we don't have to go in super detail, but a cheat sheet for the thoughtful communication is, does this need to be communicated in the first place? Sometimes if there's a lot of stuff that needs constant communication, it's usually a sign that something is not working super well, but we won't go too deep into that, it's in the blog post. The other thing is, like, is this the right medium for the thing I want? Like, is this urgent? Is it a decision-making thing? Am I just asking for feedback on an idea? Every time we interview someone, strong verbal and written communication is a critical assessment, and it's obviously the only way you get work done in a group of people. And there are fantastic reasons to communicate, and you just have to be explicit, like, why am I doing this? Why am I having this meeting? Building personal relationships is a great reason to have meetings, because it's very hard to do over quick documents. Communicate meaningful status updates is a great reason. Getting feedback on ideas, making decisions. There are a lot of reasons to communicate, but you basically should treat it as an expensive currency and be deliberate about how you spend it. That is really at the core of that principle. So, internal communication is expensive. Take the costs seriously and be thoughtful about it. Cool. Principle 1, 2, 3 are be thoughtful. I think everyone got that now. So we're going to switch gears into a slightly different set of topics. 4 is prioritize ownership. I've renamed some of these. I'm not sure if these are the final names. We can work on that. But ownership is a pretty important piece, and there are 2 parts to that. There's at a company level, we hire generally fewer, stronger people and provide them with clear ownership over a specific scope of work. And the idea is that it should always apply to everyone. Like if you're an intern on some team, you get a tiny project, you should have ownership over that tiny project. If you're leading an entire function, you should have ownership over that entire function and how decisions are made there. So from you, that means we expect that within the realm of your capability, which we try to assess together, you can own your own work. What does owning your work mean? There are like a few ingredients. Clearly stating commitments, like if there are clear commitments, like I will finish that by the end of the week. Proactively communicating surprises. So, hey, I said I'm going to finish it by the end of the week, but this and this happened, it's going to be another week later. Understanding the context of the work. So not just like taking a thing and doing it, but understanding why you're doing it such that you can make sensible decisions within the scope of the project yourself. Otherwise, and this happens a lot, it's actually really easy to not have context and then go off on a project for a couple of weeks and come back with a bunch of poor decisions, which is not really anyone's fault if you didn't optimize for ownership. And then we expect you to pull in help from others where you feel you need it. So, ownership is not about like doing everything yourself, not relying on other people, but it is about being clear about which things are you responsible for and can we trust you to own these independently. The nice thing about owners is they don't need oversight. So you don't need people walking around behind the desks like, hey, are you still working on the thing that I told you to work on? And like, no, that's not the way we want to build a company. So that's a really great part. But as I mentioned, there's still need for help and collaboration from managers across the team, etc. The big difference is that the person who owns the project should be looping in the help they need, ideally. And this might not always perfectly happen, but that's really what we're trying to optimize for. And so more owners means we have fewer managers and more leaders. I won't go into this, be like a whole nother talk, but leaders in a company ideally can think about the function as a whole. They can think about their team dynamics and which people to hire and where to put them, and they shouldn't spend their time checking in. They're like, are you still working on the thing? What about the deadline, etc. So we want people to be working mostly independently. And we're doing very well on that. The other thing is the number of initiatives a company can run is kind of limited by the number of owners, and that's another thing where like headcount growth tends to get out of control. If you add a bunch of people that are not owners, or you add a bunch of people into a non-ownership mentality, the incremental productivity of every person is very, very low, because they can't make good decisions independently, they don't have the context of why they're doing things, and everything just runs astray. So it's a big limiting factor on how you can grow a company. Which brings us to the next principle. Be frustratingly patient about hiring and be stingy on headcount. If you had to summarize it in one slide, it would be like no hire is better than an okay hire. again, could be its own talk, but there are a lot of second-order effects of OK hires. One of them is you may have to manage them, right? If they're not independent, they don't fit in the way we like to work, then now maybe 30% of a manager's time is just consumed managing this person. And you're going to do that for a long time. Like, unless they don't work out, they might be around for like 3 to 4 years. And you know, I see people get frustrated after like 2 months of interviewing for a role, but think about the 4 years you're going to spend working with that person. Just visualize that, and then reconsider. So that's on the individual level. And then there's also at the company level, like when do we add people? You know, it's a really easy trap to fall into. It's like, oh man, we're so busy, we need to do more stuff, let's hire some people. And we did that, and we did it, I think, in a thoughtful way, that I'll touch on that. But there are a few things to consider when you want to add headcount. And it comes back to the ownership piece, largely. Like, what exactly does this new person own? Is it a new thing? Are they taking away a thing from another person? Are they starting to share a thing? You really have to think about the design of whatever, either your team or the whole organization, depending on which level this happens, to just get a sense of like which person owns which thing after we added this person. The general idea is there are certain roles. When you hire a first person, you hire a new kind of person. These are really critical. If you have like capacity constraints, and that's mostly on customer-facing roles, and you want to add more of the same type of person, then these questions become a little bit less important. The ownership piece is still very important. And then if they're a leadership hire, even more important to think about like, hey, do they want to build their own team? And are we aligned on the way they want to build a team? Like, we interview people sometimes like, I want to be a manager and I just want to hire a lot of people. Not good. So you have to be really careful when you make leadership hires and be really aligned on like what does a team look like down the line. And the reason to be so careful, there are a lot of reasons, but one of them that I've observed in a lot of larger companies is like, as companies grow, people actually become protective of their work because there often isn't enough stuff to go around. Like, the company's always busy, but there's an imbalance of bandwidth on different teams. And so you have like product managers going behind engineering managers' back to try to convince engineers to build stuff for them because they don't have any engineers on their projects. And you just have people create like a political environment where people don't have enough of their priorities being implemented. And it creates a really dangerous dynamic, and we want to avoid that. So that's why I think really carefully about what are the things we need to do, who owns these things, and then if we add new owners, like, are these net new projects, or do they take things away from existing people, and does that make sense? Another thing is the ROI of incremental hires tends to trend down pretty quickly, and that is not true of sales. More incremental sales hires is generally great if your business is doing well. But on things like engineering and product and other places, like, typically at any point in time, you have critical projects, and these critical projects people are working on, and then you hire more people to work on the next less critical project. And the balance is like to find like whenever we reach a point where like the ROI of this new project is just not worth doing it, right? Or is this like low enough priority that we can just wait for a really strong person? Or is it a very high priority so we have to hire someone who maybe not be a perfect fit? So you have to think about it pretty carefully. But generally the alternative to hiring in these cases is just scratch incremental projects. And I put here, again, not customer-facing teams, so a kind of different dynamic. The nice thing about customer-facing teams is they work a little bit more independently, which means you can scale them easier without creating all these dynamics that you have on like marketing, product, engineering. Obviously, there are great reasons to hire. We're building hiring software, so I'm not going to just preach like don't hire people. But as with all other principles, it's like the thing is just be thoughtful about it. Like really take a step back, be like, what does this new person do, and how does it add value to the business? Cool. Next, optimize for long term, but move with urgency. Optimizing for the long term has been baked in, and I talked about why earlier. The type of business we built, we knew we can build a massive company. All we have to do is execute extremely well. And so that has been, like, from day one, a huge competitive advantage. And the more patient you can be, the bigger that advantage. It is hard to do sometimes. I mean, we saw people adjust when they joined because, you know, basically you just have to think principally and be really confident in that decision that there is actually a market for the thing you're building. And then you also have to be really excited about focusing on the inputs over the outputs. Like, you have to be okay celebrating product incremental milestones rather than revenue milestones. That's actually a hard thing to do because most people don't operate that way. And it's easy to be, you'll be misunderstood for a long time if you do that by both people that join the company, by investors that are not super thoughtful. They're like, why is your revenue still so low? So, well, building a very big product and we only sold a very small part of it. But it's generally, you're kind of going against the grain if you do that. But this is like a not so pretty drawing, but it will probably help. I'm going to chart out like these two types of companies. We go back to the slide where we had the gems and then we had the Ashby's as comparison. If you have this company that takes off early, on average, this is not true for every company, but on average, it takes off early, and then you win with a very small foundation, but then at some point you taper out. You just don't have the foundation to build on top of that, and it's very hard to fix. You just kind of hit a ceiling. And if you focus on long term, then it looks a little bit more like this, hopefully. But you build, you build, you build. You don't observe anything on the output metrics for a really long time, but you build a really good foundation. Once you start capturing value, you can build a much, much bigger business. And this is not only true at the... oh yeah, I had look. That will happen, by the way. Like if we do well, like people that look at us now and say, oh yeah, it's nice, but it's still early. I'm not sure if they can actually do this. And then if we do well, like 3 or 4 years from now, people are like, wow, I'm so mind blown. Like they had this great idea and had so much conviction, and now look at an amazingly growing business. But yeah, so that's what I want to touch on. This is also true on not just on sales, but also in engineering. We built the reporting foundation very early on because we said reporting is going to be a key thing. And we spent a few months before we had a product just like building that foundation, and now we can build on top of it, and we're extremely productive. And any competitor that needs to go back and do that, it's very, very hard to do. But long-term focus cannot be an excuse for a lack of urgency. So you can't just be like, oh, I'm not coming to work on Monday because I'm optimizing for the long term. I mean, you can if you're taking PTO, but there still needs to be some urgency. And the urgency comes in 2 forms. One is an urgency for some near-term results. Like there needs to be enough progress, either for revenue or to convince investors to give you money, such that you can move the company along and actually survive long enough to capture all that tail end of the curve. And then the other type of urgency is a focus on the inputs, because you're not actually urgent on the inputs, and you won't move along this curve very far. So urgency on inputs, I'll talk about that. Urgency is not rushing, but it's an intense focus on maximizing results per unit of time. And we have a nice example of that, I think, from a couple of months ago, but Norby and Kevin were working on this scheduled dashboard feature, or we're considering it. And Norby did an analysis. It's like, okay, this could take up to 6 months to build, and that would probably be one of our only projects we do this year. And he had a sense of urgency that is maybe not acceptable. Like, I didn't think we want to spend 6 months on this relative to the value it provides to the business. And so Kevin and Norby decided to scratch that and prioritize other projects instead. Some of which are alerts and hiring planner, which I think had higher impact than this would have had. And so that urgency is not about rushing, but is like, okay, am I comfortable with the amount of progress we're going to make if we pick this path? If you aim high, generally, you may not hit what you're aiming for at first try, but you will end up with something that's kind of further along than if you would have not aimed high in the first place. And everyone has to find like their own comfort level of like how much they want to overcommit to things and not. But generally, starting with like a slightly higher goal can be extremely helpful. At a company level, that means we didn't set out to build an ATS, we didn't set out to build a recruiting metrics tool. We said, what we're going to build in the long term is a big company, something like Workday. It's going to be a 40 billion, 100 billion, $1 trillion company. It's going to have all these things and thousands of very productive people. And so we're going to see how far we get along that. But that framework has helped us make decisions. Like today, we're still building ATS. You could look at us and go, they have all these long-term ambitions. Are we actually going to do it? But it did go into a lot of early design decisions. How we build a product, what foundation, how we build a team. And we wouldn't have done that if we would have set the bar much, much lower. It's really, really hard to raise that bar afterwards. So what does it mean one more. It's also more fun to be ambitious, at least for the kind of people that we like to hire. So at a project level, what does it mean for you individually? I think it's just important to consider if you can do better. You come up with something, and then you just take a moment to like, is there any way that could be better? And could it be better than other people tend to do it? And there's another, it's getting a little bit cheesy, and I'm not acknowledging it, but is how could this be 10x better? I don't like 10x because it's not very literal, but it can be a helpful exercise to just take a step back and be like, if we want to ship this feature in 2 weeks instead of 2 months, is it possible? And the answer will probably be no, but it takes a little bit out of the box in how to think about possible solutions. So aiming high does not mean setting unrealistic goals or deadlines, but it does mean carefully considering what fantastic would look like and how we might get there. And it's kind of a mind trick. I just touched on that. It takes you out of the comfort zone, and it can make you do things better than you thought was possible. And I didn't have time to put a bunch of personal stories here, but I have a bunch of things in the past where I signed up for it because I thought I could do it, and then I started doing it, and I was terrible at it. But by the time I delivered the project, I was okay and I learned a lot of stuff. So it can be helpful if you want to stretch yourself every once in a while. And aiming low is mostly kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You rarely overachieve what you set out to do. If we had said, like, we build an ATS, it was very unlikely that we would have then gone on to build like a ton of other things. Cool. This one is very short, and it's kind of an extension. Maybe they need to be merged. That push for continuous improvement. We hold ourselves to a very high standard, which is that there's always a better way. This is more about existing things. You know, it's like not about new things, but like just going back to like what are things we're doing. Again, reflect. Is there a way to improve it? And the important thing is to focus on the right things, and it comes back to prioritization. That you don't want to do micro improvements for things that don't matter, but you do want to identify the big pieces and continuously try how you can do it better. And there's really no ceiling to that. I think that's kind of comes back to the company mission. There's always a way to do something you're doing incrementally better. The last one is interesting. I added this because it wasn't in our values, but every time someone asked me when we interviewed them, it's like, what are your values? And it's like, here's the things I'm seeing. Like, people care a lot about customers. Kind of makes sense. We sell to customers. So I put it as an explicit principle because I thought it would be helpful. So kind of obvious, but we exist only to delight our customers with products and services. That's, eventually we will be one of these rare profitable companies and customers will fund us. But we also just generally hire people that are very, very excited about working with customers. They get a joy out of delighting customers, and they also feel the pain viscerally when things go wrong. I see that in all the people we've hired. I see it in like how support and engineering work in escalations. I think we do, it's a little bit of a stereotype, but we do truly care. So I wanted to give it its own value and its own image. I wouldn't comment on this slide, I'll just put it there. Cool, and yeah, this is a good example of an operating principle that has been well in the life but never documented. And that's kind of a better kind, right? I think you rather want people actually doing the things rather than remembering the things. Okay, you're almost done. Corporate cheesy image. Okay, in summary, the good news is this is really long. All the principles are kind of wordy, but I came up with a really helpful acronym. Okay, just kidding. One last principle, we don't like acronyms. And our operating principles need to be understood in detail, and you can't take shortcuts. So. But we'll give you a link to read. Summary, apply principle thinking, reflect on how your team uses your time, optimize for impact leverage, apply thoughtful communication, prioritize ownership, be frustratingly patient at hiring, optimize for long term, aim high, push for continuous improvement, and care deeply about our customers. And Benji needs to decide on the right capitalization for these. I'm going to call them that. Okay, we're asking a lot of all of you. So, why? What is it for you? The way I think about it is working at Ashby should feel rewarding. That's the word I came up with. There are things that are fun, like a cocktail bar or a visit to the zoo. And then there are things that are rewarding, like raising kids or running a marathon. So we're more on the rewarding side of things, but also some fun. What are the rewards? One of the things that's most important to me is just working with an amazing team. Again, kind of stereotypical, but it was one of the main reasons that Beacon and I wanted to start a company, to be able to pick the people we can work with. I think there's a lot of room to grow because we have high ownership and to do your best work, which is a cliche, but I do think it's true. And then appropriate financial reward if we do well. And then we also like to have fun every once in a while. But we're not competing to be the most fun place. Like if you want to give, if you're really deeply passionate about giving nicknames to Ashby employees, we may not be. By that I mean like Ashbyans or Ashby shenanigans, Ashby's. If that is your top corporate priority, then maybe we're not the right place. These here that are partially in the values today, but curiosity is an important one. There's some level of drive to just want to improve whatever you do and whatever your scope is. Humility, I think, is a very big one that stands out. That's been incredibly important to me and very, very satisfying is to work with very smart people that are also very, very humble and just like nice to work with. Reliability is just a prerequisite for ownership. If you're not reliable, that's just hard. Transparency, it's a spectrum, but we err on the side of kind of sharing more things and being honest with each other about how things are going. And don't take yourself too seriousness, which I think is another attribute. Cool. This slide I wanted to rework, but I didn't have any time because I was doing it yesterday evening. But a very, very final summary. We exist to delight our customers with our products and services and raise the bar for our whole category, like B2B software as a whole. That's like the underlying indefinite mission. And for any of you who still works here in 40 years, that is what we're going to continue to be doing. We're very deliberate about the people we bring on and how we organize them. Low headcount, ownership. We're very deliberate about how we spend time and energy. The smallest details matter because they shape the day-to-day experience. Again, you have to be into the details to be able to figure out how a company is working. Examples, thoughtful communication, reflecting on time allocation versus impact. We don't settle for conventional wisdom because it's not very wise on average. For things that we are deeming a priority, there's always a better way to do it. We optimize for the long term, but do so with urgency. And we focus on inputs, how well we do the things, over outputs. Outputs still matter a lot, and that's what drives the business in the end. But it's always a lagging indicator of all the work we put in beforehand. And we do all of that with people that are fun being around. So let's do some work we can be proud of.